Okay, good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Sudaso and I'll be answering questions about Buddhism. So this is the weekly monk chat session, an opportunity to ask any questions about Buddhism, and I'll do my best to give some relevant responses. So first off, hello to the people joining in. Hello to Ryan, Scott, Rick, Kowser Friend, HPD, and anyone else who's watching. So I'll go ahead and start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through whatever questions there are, and you can type in more questions at any time. When the flow of questions stops, then monk chat will stop. So if you'd like me to keep answering questions, please continue typing in questions. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So I see a couple questions posted already. So there's a question here from Rick who says, what guidance does the Buddha give on how the different seasons of the year affect our minds and practice? And the answer is virtually nothing. The Buddha didn't really talk about seasons of the year as having any relevance whatsoever to our practice. Literally the only thing that comes to mind is there's one sutta where the Buddha says that during the summer, during the hottest months of the year, that he takes a nap in the afternoon. So that doesn't exactly qualify as advice for practice, but that's literally the only thing I can think of where the Buddha talks about the season having any effect on how to practice or what he does. And even that I wouldn't interpret to say that you should take a nap in the afternoon during the summertime. It's just literally the only thing I can think of where the Buddha even talks about seasons in anything other than a casual way. So this then leads me to believe that the seasons don't have any effect on our practice, or doesn't have any significant effect on our practice anyway, because the Buddha never said anything about it. Okay, and HPD says, can you explain what the Abhidhamma is and why you advise not to practice it? Well, so the Buddha gave a number of teachings and lectures over the course of his life after attaining awakening. So about 45 years or so of teaching, which people memorized and codified into what we nowadays have as the Pali Suttas. Then sometime after the Buddha's passing, during the first 300 years or so after the Buddha's passing, a number of people also made an effort to try to extract the basic abstract principles from the Buddha's teachings, and then to compile that into a set of philosophical manuals and condensed matrix-like information structures, which then came to be called the Abhidhamma. So the Abhidhamma then is not something which was said by the Buddha himself, but rather it represents an effort by some of the subsequent generations, again, particularly in the first 300 years, though some pieces of the Abhidhamma may have been produced sometime after that as well. But an effort by those first generations after the Buddha to try to codify, to try to condense and codify the essence of what the Buddha was saying. And this is already quite problematic, because even just looking at the Abhidhamma Pitaka, the oldest layer of Abhidhamma texts, it's already started to drift quite a bit from the flavor of Dhamma that we see in the suttas. And it's also already started to generate its own terminology, and it's already started to generate its own body of ideas and concepts, which again are in the Abhidhamma Pitaka. It's still relatively close to the suttas, but it's already starting to drift away. Then the next major development in Abhidhamma literature was about 1,000 years after the Buddha, when the Abhidhamma commentaries were produced in Sri Lanka. So this was an extensive body of literature which was taking the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which already was a significant departure from what the Buddha said in the suttas, and it was building upon and expanding and taking it even farther and developing the unique Abhidhamma terminology even more. And in doing so, again, drifting farther and farther and farther from the Buddha's actual teachings. And then the next major development was in the 13th century in Burma, when a set of documents were once again compiled from the Abhidhamma commentaries and condensed into a number of Abhidhamma manuals, which claimed to represent the essence of the Abhidhamma, and therefore claimed to represent the essence of the Dhamma. And at this point, it's so far removed from anything the Buddha ever said that it's barely recognizable as even being Buddhist. And wanders into a number of quite dangerous viewpoints, which again come dangerously close to contradicting some of the core teachings that we find in the suttas. Then, based upon that, there emerged some schools of meditation, principally in Burma, which were based upon these quite recent, actually, only a few centuries old, texts, which themselves were based upon the Abhidhamma commentaries, which themselves were based upon the Abhidhamma texts, which themselves were written, compiled, produced by generations after the Buddha's passing. So here we have the grand telephone game played out over centuries of people getting more and more removed from the Buddha's words, more and more removed from the Buddha's teachings, more and more removed from the Dhamma itself. And in doing so, claiming that they're actually getting closer to the Dhamma. So if you talk to any given Abhidhamma proponent, then they'll usually make claims that the Abhidhamma represents the true essence of Buddha Dhamma. It represents the refined, extracted, pure essence of the Buddha's teachings. And it's like, well, if that was the case, then the Buddha would have just said that 2,500 years ago, instead of all the other things that he said. But again, if you actually look at what, again, is supposedly this refined essence of Dhamma that's called Abhidhamma, you'll find it actually quite starkly contrasts with what the Buddha actually did say. And then it leads to people creating these meditation schools based upon these apocryphal texts. And then those forms of meditation then are not really quite what the Buddha was talking about. Not quite following the instructions of the Buddha, but rather something else. So this is not to say that Abhidhamma is inherently evil or bad, but rather that it represents just the opinions of a bunch of people over the subsequent centuries after the Buddha's passing. And those opinions are not to be taken as authoritative, but rather just to be seen as the opinions of a bunch of people. And the Buddha's instructions are that whenever someone claims something as the Dhamma, we should always compare it back to what's in the suttas. And what lines up with the suttas, we can accept, and what does not line up with the suttas, we should reject. So I actually have spent quite a bit of time studying Abhidhamma and comparing it to what's in the suttas, and I found a lot that does not line up, a lot that is not in accordance with what we find in the suttas. So I have to come to the inevitable conclusion that over the centuries of authors producing Abhidhamma literature, that they've lost touch with the suttas. They've lost touch with the Buddha's own teachings. So this is why I don't particularly recommend studying the Abhidhamma. Or if you do study the Abhidhamma, it has to be done so with the clear understanding that these are not the words of the Buddha. These are not the teachings of the Buddha. It's just the opinions of some random people produced hundreds of years later. Then it's fine, as long as you understand it for what it is. And as long as you always place the suttas as number one, as the most important. So next question. Rick says, sometimes practice can be difficult and demanding. Sometimes? Only sometimes? I think you're doing pretty well if it's only sometimes. So Rick says, what are ways you have found helpful toward bringing a spirit of play, fun, or delight to the practice? Well, loving kindness meditation makes a huge difference. Not taking yourself seriously also makes a huge difference. Like, I don't know how the rest of y'all see me, but I think I'm a clown. Like, I think I'm just a goofball, nothing important, nothing serious. Just another joker making some feeble attempt to follow the Buddha's instructions. So relate to yourself in that same way. See yourself as a clown, like some goofball who's doing their best to be a good Buddhist, but falling quite a bit short of the mark. So have that kind of relaxed, lighthearted attitude towards yourself in your own practice. Don't expect yourself to be perfect. Expect yourself to be a goofball. Expect yourself to be a clown. Don't take your own antics too seriously. Just laugh. It's like, oh, of course, that goofy unenlightened person did some goofy unenlightened stuff again. What else do you expect? What are we expecting here? Can't expect perfection from the unperfected. So that kind of lighthearted, relaxed attitude towards one's own practice and one's own mind. Like when you see your mind doing crazy things, you just laugh about it. It's like, well, of course, what do you expect? What do you expect from an unenlightened mind? So you just smile and relax and don't take it seriously. So these are all things that I found to be quite helpful. And of course, just one thing which never gets old is mindfulness of the body. Just constantly coming back to an relaxed yet intense awareness of my own physical body. And that has a way of cutting through all of the emotional turmoil, all of the mental garbage, all of the confusion, all the anguish. It just kind of melts away. Constantly coming back to this intense yet relaxed awareness of the body. Okay, Julie says, many spiritual teachings speak of self-realization and oneness. How did the Buddha speak of we are all connected, a comparable teaching in any way? There's actually one sutta where the Buddha says that there's two wrong views. So one is the wrong view of plurality, and the other is the wrong view of unity. So there's the wrong view that there's a bunch of different separate objects, so plurality. And the other is the wrong view that everything is one, all is one. That's also a wrong view. As for self-realization, Buddhist practice is not about self-realization, it's about non-self-realization. We're not trying to discover our true self, we're trying to clearly see that there is no true self. So those might be comparable teachings, I don't know. Also relevant is the Buddha also in a few places spoke about the duality of the two views of existence and non-existence, in which he said it is not accurate to say that something exists, and it's also not accurate to say that it doesn't exist. So that also touches a little bit on the topic of oneness, in that the Buddha is actually pointing to something far beyond saying it's all one. Rather, the Buddha is saying that the concepts of existence and non-existence are actually irrelevant to reality, which is a much more profound thing than saying all is one. The closest to anything being oneness is the Buddha does talk about everything being interconnected in the sense that everything is causally related to each other. There's a causal connection between everything. Everything is an interlocking web of cause and effect. But that's not quite the same as saying that everything is one or everything is unity. So Jerry says, in Anguttara Nikaya 6.10, it says that faith, ethics, learning, generosity, and wisdom are what leads to rebirth in heaven. Please give us an etymological analysis of the Pali term and a few words on how to feed the quality. well, let's see, faith is probably saddha, ethics is probably sila, learning sutta, if I had to guess, generosity, probably chaga, could be dana, but it's probably chaga. Wisdom, I suspect, is panya. So I'm actually going to quickly pull up the sutta, though I'm pretty sure that's right. Let's see, AN 6.10. Oh, the sutta is a bit longer than I would have thought. Anyway, so saddha, translating it as faith or as confidence is okay. In the suttas, it's normally defined as faith that the Buddha was fully enlightened. So faith in the qualities of the Buddha, which is a very important basis for our practice. If we don't have faith that the Buddha was enlightened, why would we bother studying the Dhamma and practicing it? And second one is sila, which I don't like translating sila as ethics. So morality is actually a much better translation. Ethics is too secular, it's too mundane. So sila is about cultivating habits of harmlessness. It's about cultivating kindness, thoughtfulness, consideration. Sila is about doing our best to cause benefit rather than damage, both to ourselves and to others. So it's about cultivating moral conduct, moral behavior. Next, learning. Again, I suspect it's a translation of the Pali word sutta with one T, S-U-T-A, one T. Not to be confused with the word sutta, two T's. So sutta, S-U-T-T-A, means the discourse. The discourses of the Buddha is how we normally use the word. Whereas sutta, S-U-T-A, is actually the past participle of the verb that means to listen or to hear. So sutta means you've listened, you've heard. And this is because during the time of the Buddha, as actually throughout most of human history up until very recently, the vast majority of people were illiterate, and therefore the way you learned things was by listening. You would go to teachers and listen very carefully so that you could clearly hear and understand. So the word sutta, S-U-T-A, again, it literally means listened, but it's understood to mean this is someone who has really made an effort to learn. And in the suttas, to be sutta, to be learned, means in particular that one has listened to a lot of the suttas. One has made an effort to learn a lot of the Buddha's discourses. And actually the recommendation, so the standard description of what it means to be well learned is one has listened to a lot of the suttas, one has memorized a lot of the suttas, and one constantly recites the suttas. So it's not enough just like, oh yeah, I read a sutta once. But rather the idea is that you should really embed it into your mind and also constantly refresh it verbally. And it also says that one should constantly examine it mentally. So again, it's not enough. It's like, oh yeah, I read the Satipatthana Sutta once, therefore I'm learned. It's like, no. One, the Buddha says you should stockpile and accumulate knowledge about the discourses. So this means we should really make an effort to really fill our mind with the suttas, the Buddha's discourses. And that doesn't mean like reading contemporary books by contemporary teachers, and it definitely doesn't mean studying Abhidhamma commentaries, but rather it means actually studying the suttas, reading the suttas, the discourses of the Buddha, and making an effort to memorize at least some of it, and to recite it. So in the monastery, we recite suttas every day, morning and evening, and also constantly think about the suttas. Constantly turn them over in your mind, constantly reflect upon what the Buddha said, what it means and how it applies and how you can apply it. This is what it means to be learned in the context of Buddhism. And the fourth word, chaga, translated as generosity, but it also has the sense of relinquishment or letting go. So it does mean, in fact, generosity, but it also has the sense of relinquishment or renunciation or letting go. And then panya, the last one, wisdom. In the suttas, panya is defined in a few common ways. One of the common ways is it is the wisdom which understands the arising and ceasing of all things. In other words, the observation of the impermanent, non-persistent, ever-changing nature of all things. This is one of the most common ways that the Buddha defined panya, is observing impermanence, observing the change of all things. Panya is also sometimes defined in other ways, such as the wisdom which knows the Four Noble Truths, the wisdom which knows the three characteristics, so anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. But the most common way he defines panya is that which discerns the arising and ceasing of phenomena, so the constant changing of all things. Okay, so Ryan says, during last Friday night's talk, I said I had read the Buddha describing all things converge on feelings. It is not a quote, but an extrapolation by Nyanaponika Thera on the Vedana Samyutta. However, in this text, Venerable Nyanaponika is quoting from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 9, sutta number 14, where Venerable Samidhi went to Venerable Sariputta asking about this. What is their meeting place? He says, feeling is their meeting place. Tepana Samidhi King Samosarana, Vedana Samosarana. I think this would be a good sutta to go through in a sutta study. So maybe we can add that to the list. So Anguttara Nikaya 9:14. Okay, you'll remember that?
I don't. It's recorded.
Ah, okay. And then HPD says, Zen Buddhism has suttas like the Vimalakirti Sutta and the Platform Sutra. Is it okay to study them? Are they similar to Abhidhamma? I would say the answer is both. They are similar to Abhidhamma in the sense that they are produced by later generations, and it's also okay to study them. So again, it's not that you are forbidden from studying secondary sources. It's just that you need to understand that a secondary source is secondary. Primary source is the suttas, the Pali Suttas. That is the only primary source. Everything else is a secondary source, which means all of it takes second place. So the Platform Sutra, for example, it's great. I like it. I've read the Platform Sutra a few times. It's really nice. There's a lot of really great material in there. And it is not the words of the Buddha. Is it Buddhist? Yes, it is Buddhist. Does it contain Dhamma? Yes, it does. Is it the words of the Buddha? No, it's not. So we always need to be very careful whenever handling anything that's not the words of the Buddha. We need to be very careful that we don't confuse it with the actual words of the Buddha. And we especially don't want to place it above the words of the Buddha. Okay, Yongchu says, if possible, what would be the top 3 sayings of the Buddha for a lay person to know? Sabbe Sankara Anicca, Sabbe Sankara Dukkha, and Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. Those are the 3. All things are impermanent, all things are unsatisfying, all things are impersonal. Those are the 3 top sayings of the Buddha for everyone, whether you're a lay person or a monastic. Nikhil says, how do we know that someone has attained arahantship? You don't, unless it's you. So an arahant knows for themselves that they've attained full awakening. Nobody else necessarily knows. In fact, it's quite possible for someone to be fully enlightened and nobody around them has any idea. They just think, oh, that person's a really nice old monk. It's always pleasant to be around them. They never seem to be bothered by anything. They're always friendly and kind and peaceful. How nice. And people might not even suspect that that person is fully enlightened. Because one of the things about an arahant is that they have a completely perfectly humble mind. So they won't go around bragging about being an arahant. In fact, they probably won't even tell anyone. except under very specific exceptional circumstances. So I actually suspect there's been a lot of arhants throughout Buddhist history that nobody even knew. Nobody had any idea that they were awakened. They just thought it was a nice old monk. Yeah. It's easier to tell when somebody is definitely not an arhat. Does somebody show any trace of arrogance? Then they're not an arhat. Do they show sensual desire? Then they're not an arhat. Do they show aversion, negativity, hostility? Then they're not an arhat. Are they a lay person? Then they're not an arhat. Do they have any sign of attachment or obsession? Then they're not an arhat. So it's usually pretty easy if you watch someone for a little while. You can usually tell when they're not enlightened. But you can't really know for sure that somebody actually is enlightened unless you can look inside their mind. Okay, Julie says, what importance does concentration play? Is it to support us in not giving into temptations that could steer us off the spiritual path? Well, depends on what you mean by concentration. If by concentration you mean samadhi, well, the Buddha himself said that the primary function of samadhi is to allow the mind to know and see things as they actually are. So the Buddha said, Samahitang chittang yatha bhutang jnana dasanam. When the mind is in samadhi, it knows and sees things as they actually are. So the function of samadhi is that it enables wisdom. It enables insight to occur. Without strong samadhi, there is no strong wisdom. The depth of your samadhi, the depth of your wisdom is directly dependent upon the depth of your samadhi. So the primary function of samadhi is to enable wisdom to be deep and strong. That's its main function. It also serves some secondary functions. For example, the Buddha says that the way to abandon sensual desire is through experiencing the pleasure of samadhi. So that's actually one of the interesting benefits of cultivating samadhi, is that it helps one to have disenchantment, dispassion, towards ordinary forms of pleasure, because the pleasure of samadhi is much superior in every possible way. So in that sense, it does help to stop one from giving into temptations, as you say. But its primary function is to enable deep and strong wisdom. HPD says, how can I know if I'm practicing an Abhidhamma school? By reading the suttas. That's how you know. Read the suttas. It's the closest thing you can get to actually having the Buddha in front of you is reading the suttas. So read the suttas. And anything that you've encountered which doesn't line up with what's in the suttas, you should be suspicious about it. Meredith says, sorry, Bhante, you're not a goofball. Yes, I am, Meredith. I'm a goofball. I should show up with clown makeup the next time I do monk chat. Actually, still one of my favorite things. This was about, gosh, almost 20 years ago now. I was in a Zen monastery, and there was one of the senior Zen priests, this very dignified elderly woman, was giving a Dhamma talk, and she took out a clown nose and put it on her nose at the start of the talk, and gave the whole talk with a clown nose on. And I just thought this was absolutely brilliant, because it was pointing to exactly this thing of like, don't take yourself so seriously. Relax. Enjoy your practice. Buddhism is not about self-torture. It's the exact opposite. It's about learning how to be happy all the time. So don't take yourself so seriously. Just relax and enjoy the process. Okay. My Bill says, I'm having difficulty feeling hate. I'm living with my sister-in-law, and it's as if she has access to many ways of endlessly triggering me. I don't want to hate her, yet every day I say in silence, I hate you so much. It seems that metta practice is not accessible to me, or it's not working even though I try. Advice? Yes, this sounds familiar. Sounds like my own mind for the past 20 years. So, keep doing metta practice anyway. So doing metta practice, even when it seems like it's not working, will still gradually shift the mind over time. So keep doing metta practice. Don't give up on it. But the other thing that I would recommend is to start deliberately doing acts of kindness for your sister-in-law, if you're not already. Start paying attention to her routines, figure out how you can help, and start doing things to help her. Figure out what she likes, what she enjoys, and do things just for her benefit. If she likes ginger cookies, then bake a batch of ginger cookies for her. If there's some place that she spends a lot of time, then clean it up really nicely and arrange everything really nicely for her. Like, start looking for ways that you can do acts of kindness for her. And while you're doing those acts of kindness, really think, may she be happy. I hope that she enjoys and appreciates these things that I'm doing for her. This is something that can really transform the mind. So not just doing metta meditation, but doing metta actions. And also avoidance. Avoidance is also great. Try to avoid her. Avoid being in the same room as her as much as possible. Avoid interacting with her. Minimize your contact as much as possible. Because this also is something we need to be realistic about, is our practice actually strong enough to face really challenging situations? And so sometimes actually the way we handle things is just by spending a lot of time alone and avoiding difficult people, avoiding difficult situations until we're really sure that we can face it without giving in to our defilements. Julie says, do you happen to remember which sutta that was? Send us an email and I'm pretty sure I can find it. It shows up in many places in the suttas. Okay. And Ryan says, Venerable Nyanaponika goes on to say, through actual experience, it can thus be confirmed that the ever-revolving round of dependent origination can be stopped at the point of feeling, and that there is no inherent necessity that feeling is followed by craving. Is this realistic? Yeah, that's actually based on things that the Buddha says in the suttas. So just the simple proof of this is that an arhat, an awakened being, still has the five khandhas. They still have body, feelings, recognition processes, mental activities, and consciousness. So they still have all the components of body-mind, including Vedana, feeling. But an arhat has no craving. So yes, it is actually held through in the suttas that one can have Vedana, feeling, without craving. The two are not inseparable. They can be pulled apart. Richard says, I heard from an alcoholic that after giving whatever addiction from even decades, one can suddenly fall again into it. I almost fell again into a past addiction last week. How to prevent that to happen? Well, first off, Richard, if you do have a serious addiction problem of any sort, then I do recommend addiction treatment programs, addiction therapy, addiction counseling. So that is actually one of the few redeeming qualities of contemporary psychotherapy, is they actually have figured out some pretty effective ways of helping people deal with addiction problems. So I do actually recommend that if that's something that you've been struggling with, seek out addiction counseling, addiction therapy. There's quite a bit of useful tools there that you might find useful. Of course, keep up your Buddhist practice with sincerity and diligence, because sincere Buddhist practice does also address the root issues of addiction. So not necessarily in a direct or specific way, but in a generalized way, which over time will tend to weaken all of your addictive tendencies. So recognizing the gratification, the drawback, and the escape is one of the standard things the Buddha recommended. So when there's something that we crave, something that we want, something that we're attached to, something that we're obsessed with, well, the Buddha says recognize the gratification. So admit that there actually is some pleasantness to the thing that we crave. Otherwise, we wouldn't be interested. So acknowledge, yeah, there is gratification, but also acknowledging that it's limited. It only goes to a certain point. It's not ultimately satisfying. It doesn't last. It's impermanent. It's temporary. It leaves us feeling discontented in the end. It doesn't actually solve our problems. In fact, it just worsens our problems by fueling the sense of hollowness inside, sense of lacking inside. And then the escape is dispassion, disenchantment, disinterest, equanimity, contentment, serenity. This is the escape. Because when the mind is settled in contentment and equanimity, then it doesn't need anything. When the mind is settled in renunciation, then it doesn't need anything. And the mind can be completely peaceful and relaxed and happy without needing anything at all. Okay, HPD says, there's a Tibetan Buddhist sect that is rapidly growing in the USA. Not sure if I can say their name, but it's a 3-letter word. I don't know. I'm skeptical because they talk very little about the Buddha, but read from books their teacher wrote. I would like to know your thoughts about such pop Buddhism and the claims that they make about making Buddhism simple. Oh, I'm extremely skeptical about all manner of pop Buddhism. I'm extremely skeptical of anyone which claims that they're teaching Buddhism made simple. And I'm also very skeptical of anything which is fixated entirely on just books their teacher wrote or things their teacher says and not about the Buddha. So to me, those are all warning signs. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. So one thing that comes to mind, for example, is Dharma Drum Buddhism, which is a branch of Chan Buddhism from Taiwan. And they mostly talk about their own deceased master, Shengyen Fasher. So very experienced and learned and highly respected monk from Taiwan. And his teachings are great. They're really clear. They're really, really good teachings. And they're also pretty well in line with the Buddha's own teachings. So are they perfect? No. Are they good? Yeah. Is it sufficient by itself? No. Is it good in conjunction with studying the suttas? Yeah. So we also need to have some wisdom in being able to discern when something is genuinely heretical in the sense that it's teaching things which are contrary to the Buddhist teachings, versus when something is maybe just a bit misguided or mistaken or off the mark, versus when something actually is, in fact, genuinely harmful and damaging. So there's a whole spectrum in the Buddhist world. And what we ideally should be doing is reading the suttas so that we can know what the Buddha said. And then when we encounter things like random Tibetan Buddhist sects with 3-letter words, then we'll know whether or not they're teaching what the Buddha taught. But if you never read the suttas, then you'll never know. It'll just be like, oh, this teacher says this, and that teacher says that, and this place teaches this, and that place teaches that, and I don't know what's real. But if you read the suttas, then you actually have a basis for understanding what is Buddhism and what is not. You have a basis for understanding what's on the mark and what's off the mark. So I don't know what group you're talking about, but I would say, once again, you need to read the suttas. so that you can evaluate for yourself when something is teaching what the Buddha taught or not. So Rick says, does transcendent dependent origination give guidance on how to cultivate conditions that will lead us towards stream entry? Yeah, let go of desire, let go of attachment, let go of craving. Clearly see the impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal nature of all things. That leads towards stream entry. Brittany says, do you have suggestions for how to fully absorb the meaning of the suttas, i.e. one a day, recorded sutta study lessons, reread, etc.? Yes, what I recommend is to read through all the suttas cover to cover once to start with. And on your first read through, don't try to understand any of it. Don't expect to understand any of it. The first read through is not about comprehension. It's about absorption. It's just about absorbing the information into your mind. It's just about ingesting the words of the Buddha. So the first read through, don't expect to understand it. But what you will probably find is that after reading for a while, you'll start to understand things. But the second read through, so after you've read through all the suttas once, which I do recommend reading for a set amount of time every day. Commonly, I recommend 15 minutes a day. But if you're in a situation where you have more time, then more is better. But 15 minutes a day is a good basic minimum. So read suttas 15 minutes a day, cover to cover, until you've read all of them, which should take about 2 years, depending on your reading speed. Could be a bit faster or a bit slower. Then start over, read through them again. And on the second read through, it will make a lot more sense than the first read through. Then read through it again. Third read through, you'll realize how incredibly deep and profound every single page is. So recorded sutta studies lessons are also good, but they're not a substitute for just reading through the suttas cover to cover. But they are really helpful. Also, going to monks and asking questions about suttas is really helpful. Engaging in conversations about the suttas is really helpful. But the main thing is just keep reading and rereading and rereading the suttas. Okay. HPD says, I'm talking about NKT. Is that New Kadampa, maybe? New Kadampa? Yeah. I don't recommend them. Yeah, not recommended. Okay, Richard says, when sending metta to my enemies, I end up having nightmares of snakes. It's not my imagination. I think they are trying to caution me that my enemies are dangerous and that I'm approaching them wrongly. Maybe because I leap directly to them in my metta meditation without kindling the metta first, but I'm useless doing that. What can I do? First off, if you think you have enemies, then you're not practicing metta. The attitude of metta is that you don't have any enemies. So if you think I'm now sending metta to my enemies, then that means you're not doing metta. So I think that the problem here is that you're not actually doing metta. You're just thinking about your enemies as being your enemies. If it's kind of like, oh, I hate those people, they're my enemies, but I want my enemies to be happy. Well, of course that's not going to get you anywhere. So my recommendation for metta meditation is don't even think about enemies. Think about your friends. Think about your loved ones. Think about people who you care about naturally. The sort of people who, when you think about them, your heart naturally opens into benevolence and well-wishing. Your mind relaxes and becomes joyful and at ease. That's the kind of people you think about when doing metta meditation. And, and as you focus on cultivating that benevolent, open heart towards your loved ones, the ones you care about, then as you feel that building in the heart, as you feel that sense of open-hearted benevolence building in the heart, you can actually eventually just drop the thought of the specific person and just dwell in that boundless, spacious heart, that boundless, spacious, open, loving heart. You don't even need to think about specific people because it becomes irrelevant at that point. True metta meditation doesn't even involve specific people. It's just dwelling in that vast, open, loving heart. So as long as you're still thinking in terms of enemies, then you're nowhere close to doing metta meditation. And Kauser Friend says, is it worth learning Pali for the second, third read-through of the suttas? Yes, absolutely, yes. Yes, yes, yes. So first read-through, read it in translation. That's fine, because you're not going to understand it anyway. So reading it in translation isn't a big deal. Second read-through, I mean, it's okay to do your second read-through in translation as well, but by then you're going to start to realize, probably, you'll start to realize that the translation is getting in the way, that the translation is obscuring the meaning of the text. Then third read-through, read it in Pali. If you're planning to learn Pali, definitely read it in Pali. And HPD says, is it okay to practice sports like boxing as a form of catharsis to let out anger, then practice meditation and metta? No. I mean, it's fine to do sports. It's even fine to do boxing if you're careful. But when people talk about doing activities to let out anger, what that's actually doing is reinforcing the anger in your mind. So you don't want to do anything that reinforces anger in the mind. So no, I don't agree with doing violent activities as catharsis to let out your anger. No. Ryan says, is it not true that during the time of the Buddha, monks and lay people were gaining stream entry left and right? So there were many people who attained enlightenment during the time of the Buddha, and there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, they had a real living Buddha as their teacher. That's not a small thing. That's a really, 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 really big thing. There's a huge difference between like, oh, a Bhante Bob down the road, he teaches me Dhamma. It's like, well, okay, that's cool. Versus having an actual living Buddha in front of you who can read your mind and is a perfect teacher and knows exactly what you need to hear, knows exactly how you need to practice. So having the literally ideal teacher in front of you, fully enlightened, perfect teacher, that makes an enormous difference. And the other thing is, just think for a moment about the kind of karma that leads to somebody being born in the time and place of a Buddha. This is something I reflect on sometimes. So in order to be born in the time and place of the Buddha as a human being with the capacity to engage in spiritual practice means that somebody already has an extremely strong karmic affinity with the Buddha. They already have an extremely strong karmic affinity with Buddhism. So to be born in the time and place of the Buddha means that you're already much closer to awakening than the average person. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been born in that time and place with those conditions. So then that means you're already starting much closer to awakening than the average person these days is. And you have a real live Buddha right in front of you, teaching you exactly what you need to be taught in exactly the way you need to be taught it. So of course, there were more people attaining awakening. It would be surprising if it was otherwise. It's still possible to attain awakening these days. It's just substantially more rare and substantially more challenging, but it's always possible. There's no such thing as a period of time where it's completely impossible to attain awakening. It's always possible. It's just the farther you get from a living Buddha, the more difficult it gets, the more rare it becomes. HBD says, what would you recommend to do to transform anger into love and compassion? Practice generosity and kindness. And by this, I don't just mean doing meditation. I mean actually doing things for others. Do actions of kindness and generosity. Do kind things for others. Do generous things. That really, really works. And Elenisa says, what is the purpose of metta meditation? Is it to rest in the boundless loving kindness? And the idea of bringing a loved one is just to open our hearts to benevolence. So the way to deal with difficult people is to practice meets and action and avoidance and not include them in the metta meditation. Is this right? So loving kindness meditation serves a number of purposes. So first of all, it does help to reduce hostility from the mind. It helps to reduce anger, hatred, resentment, aversion. So all those forms of dosa, of hostility in the mind. And that then helps to clear away a lot of our surface level defilements. It also helps to cultivate a sense of contentment and joy and ease, which also then reduces our desire. And it also then helps to clear away a lot of the confusion and distraction in the mind, which then helps to reduce the surface level delusion. And of course, practicing loving kindness meditation also cultivates samadhi, which supports the arising of wisdom, as I mentioned earlier. And also, it helps to build up mindfulness of mind, which is one aspect of satipatthana practice. So it helps with cultivating mindfulness practice as well. So loving kindness meditation is beneficial in many ways. And so you said the way to deal with difficult people is to practice metta actions and avoidance and not include them in the metta meditation. Is this right? That was the recommendation I gave to the previous person. But yeah, generally speaking, I would say that if there's someone that you really hate, and whenever you think of them with hatred, well, don't think about them. In fact, try to avoid them. And if you do have to interact with them, then do actions of kindness and generosity towards them to try to change your attitude in that way. That is what I would recommend. Ryan says, what does it mean when one sheds tears of joy from reading the suttas? It means you love the Dhamma, which is a very good quality. I also love the Dhamma. And HPD says, I attended a Zen center that is very pro-social justice. They call themselves bodhisattvas and talk about compassion, but I noticed that many are angry. Yeah, the vast majority of Buddhists are not enlightened. It's very unrealistic to expect them to be enlightened. When you go to some random Zen center, then odds are you're going to meet people who are interested in Buddhism. You might even meet some people who actually are Buddhist. Odds are none of them will be enlightened. Odds are none of them will be even close. So encountering some of them being angry is quite likely. Encountering some of them being delusional, quite likely. Encountering some of them not really understanding what Buddhism is, quite likely. This is to be expected. Ryan says, I heard Ajahn Martin saying Ajahn Mahabua saw hell. If this is true, can we see heaven? Yes and yes. So this is from the suttas, and the suttas it quite clearly states that one can develop the psychic ability to see heaven and hell, to see both the higher realms with all the devas, all the angelic beings that dwell in the higher realms, and also to see the lower realms, to see the tormented spirits, the ghosts, the demonic beings, the beings living in hell, the ones in the really awful states of existence. You can see those as well. So this is part of the standard list of mind powers which one can develop in Buddhist practice. It's not strictly necessary, but it can be developed. HPD says, when people are angry and delusional, can I teach them Dhamma? Or is it best to let them be and find their own path in light? Well, HPD, your number one concern is to purify your own heart and your own mind. Because if you yourself are confused and angry and greedy and delusional, then your ability to help other people will be very limited. So it's good that you want to help other people, but in order to help other people, you also need to help yourself. So when interacting with other people, look for ways to help. And when you see an opportunity to help, then do help. But also recognize that your ability to help other people depends upon the strength of your own practice. So if you really want to help other people, the best thing you can do is purify your own mind, purify your own heart. And then with a pure heart and a clear mind, then you can see how to be of the most benefit to others. And that's the last question. So I think we'll go ahead and conclude it this time. So thank you for all your wonderful questions. And we'll conclude it this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.